Today I'm gonna watch the Venom movie. Let's talk about Batman.
Like many kids growing up, I watched Batman the animated series, and my feelings about it ranged from squealing with joy to bored pastime. Arguably the best animated TV show of all time, as a kid I didn't really understand the subtleties of its characters and stories. It was explosions, fighting, plots with magic and science, and a guy who dressed up like a bat. I loved it. In my teens, I did that thing all edgelords do and forsook everything from my childhood because I was a dark, brooding, tortured soul who saw the world for the landfill it is, with my profound experience of a single school and internet access.
It wasn't until I first saw The Dark Knight, several years after it was released, that I gave the conceited silliness that was superhero stories another shot. And when I did, I discovered a depth to them that I had not previously seen when I was a kid, and I dove headlong into the lore, the history, sometimes I even went so far as to read comics. Who the hell reads comics?
I discovered a confusing storyverse of multiple worlds and storylines connected in a contrived mess that was harder to understand than the Bible. For every character, there's 5 or more versions of the same origin story.
We're rich. We're conquerors.
And here we're poor. We're slaves.
Each one showing that character in a new light, and from that you can glean a complex intent and personality, and it evolves before your eyes. If you're a bit of a cynic like me, you'd say you throw enough shit some of it will stick, but it doesn't really matter. It still lured talented writers to combine or add to these aspects to continue the stories of these characters, asking either, what if this happened, or how can I make them grow? I bring this up because gaining deeper insight into Batman's character when I was older allowed me to appreciate him more. I knew the basics: kid lost his parents and that leads to him pummeling criminals and the monster of the week when he grows up. Riveting. And so relatable. I didn't understand him having tried to move on and being unable to, the moral choices he was forced to make, and I certainly didn't understand the gothic tragedies and victims of circumstance that turned normal people into villains. I'm not saying it's all brilliant, but when done right, it can be.
All of this relates to Venom because, like Batman, Venom only existed as an idea. He only existed as an idea. Parasitic alien turns a guy into a monster, and after a while he decides to be a hero. Wow. And it was only after I began doing some background research that I began to truly appreciate him.
I want to make something clear before I begin. The creature itself isn't Venom. Venom is what Eddie Brock calls himself when wearing it. Back to the backstory. The creature first took possession of Peter Parker during the Secret Wars storyline, and because it made him faster, stronger, and gave him powers he didn't previously have, he decided to keep using it whilst back on Earth. However, it gradually made him more violent, irritable, and self-centered. It even made him evil! When Peter does realize what it is doing to him, he tried to get rid of it in the bell tower, only for it to find and possess Eddie Brock, a reporter who's been hurt by Spider-Man. Understanding Peter and Spider-Man is the same person and further influenced by the creature, Brock begins a quest for revenge where he and the symbiote, will gradually take everything from Peter, to be the poison that slowly eats away his life before killing him.
That's why we call ourselves Venom.
So we have his motivation, but what is it that makes him interesting as a character?
First of all, Venom is a very clever metaphor for drug addiction.
Keep listening, I promise it will get interesting!
The symbiote is the mother of all steroids. It empowers every aspect of whatever host it possesses, no matter what they are. It also affects their minds, lowering their inhibition and focuses them on their highest values and goals. An instant power-up for the sole purpose of making you stronger. However, the symbiote isn't a passive creature. It has a mind and will of its own, and it will tell the host whatever it needs to hear to benefit itself. Now think of Spider-Man as an ordinary kid who tries drugs to make him get by, to deal with a horrible everyday, to give him more energy, or just make him feel good about himself and forget the misery he feels when sober. Until the point comes when he realizes what they are doing to him and he tries to get rid of them by flushing them down the toilet. So not only is Spider-Man fighting Venom a metaphor for fighting control of destructive needs, but just wearing the symbiote is a parable of as many personal demons as the author wants it to be, no matter whether the character tries to fight against them or embraces them. This leads me to Eddie Brock. I embarrassingly have to admit I don't know much about him beyond how he became Venom, but his original intentions was to get even with Spider-Man for all the things he's done towards him. Eventually, after many a caper I won't go into, they realize they are at an impasse, and Brock leaves New York for San Francisco, promising Spider-Man to only go after criminals and never innocents, because the symbiote's aggression still has to be placated, and a peculiar sort of bond has grown between Brock and symbiote. The symbiote by itself isn't evil. It's part of an alien species called the Clintar, who has a very interesting relationship with the rest of the universe, where they only bond with heroic individuals to help the universe. But this host must be ideal, both morally and physically, or the symbiote risks becoming corrupted. This is part of the reason the symbiote, not just Brock, but the symbiote wants to see Peter dead. Because, morally speaking, Peter was a perfect host, but he rejected it. And when it then bonded with Brock, it learned about human emotions such as rejection, bitterness, hatred, and the desire for revenge. So basically, Brock corrupted it, and it wants Peter dead just as much as it wants him back. Very convoluted, but that's the background it comes from, and I think it's necessary to keep all of that in mind. Eddie Brock originally never wanted to be a hero as such. He is much more self-righteous than not. He knew what was right and wrong, and tried his best. He knew what was right and wrong, and tried to be the best he could be, but he mostly did it to feel as if he was a worthwhile human being in the eyes of his equals, and his father. Upon losing his friends, wife, and family, all he can think about is vengeance and death, until the symbiote comes along and empowers him enough to get it. He's motivated by a sense of unfairness towards himself, but feels empathetic towards people he considers innocent. He's basically a truly Old Testament anti-hero who will rain fire and brimstone down on anyone he feels deserve it. And this is why I started the video by talking about Batman, because Venom is essentially the Batman of the Marvel universe, only a lot darker. He's complicated and driven by personal demons as much as a sense of justice, but unlike Batman, he is not in control of his demons. All he can do is placate them, and direct them to where they will harm the people who deserve to be harmed. He isn't just a self-centered prick though, he's a man who, just like an addict, realized he is as much of a victim of his anger and selfishness as any of the people he has hurt, and he has no control over his own life. It isn't just the symbiote, that just magnified and used the evil that was already inside of him, and he can't get rid of it. It's always inside of him, and he has to live under the threat of it taking over him every day. Unlike other addicts, he can actually talk to his shadow, converse and reason with it. And that is what makes him so interesting. He's a tragic hero, a man struggling against his own base nature and looking for redemption for the things he has done. And the irony of it is, because he can't abandon his shadow, he instead has to use it for that purpose. Now, with all of that under our belts, let's move on to the Venom movie. Sony Pictures Motion Pictures Group, oh my god, couldn't they have stuck with Columbia TriStar, have owned the movie rights to the Venom character since the 90s, with the start of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man franchise, which eventually resulted in a cringing appearance as a main villain in Spider-Man 3 in 2007. But they kept on developing scripts around the character, hoping to eventually turn it into a movie. And with the success of the MCU, they finally got their thumbs out, made their pitch, and began production, with Tom Hardy cast as Eddie Brock, and I was nervous. Sony couldn't do Spider-Man right, why would Venom be any different? That said, the more time passed and the more little
glimpses we got into production, the more I became mildly hopeful.
The news and development of this film was a bit of a roller coaster ride. At first, they dropped the horror movie style concept trailer that suggested it was going to be something markedly different from the superhero films Marvel had gotten us used to. Then, they told us Venom was only going to have about 9 minutes worth of screen time. Then the first teaser was released, which looked like the dullest, most uninteresting action film you could find. Then we hear it's going to be NC-17, which made me hope that they just didn't show us any of the cool stuff. Then they released the first full trailer to show Venom, and he looked awful. But 2 or 3 months later, they released the second trailer, where they had tried again, and this time it looked great!
Eyes, lungs, pancreas, so many snacks, so little time.
I'm sorry I couldn't find any of the stills from the first trailer. It has been swept off the internet. And then they backtrack and say it will be R-rated, but rumors say Woody Harrelson has been cast as Carnage. Basically, for every bit of bad news, there also came a bit of good news. And the studio actually seemed to be listening to how the fans reacted to the film and changed it accordingly.
On the one hand, it sounds cool that a movie changes depending on what the fans are saying. That sounds cool. But on the other hand, that seems to suggest that these people don't understand the characters or the stories. And that has me nervous. And I don't blame them for that. I don't, not considering what a cluster comics are. But it doesn't change the fact that apparently these people don't know what they're doing.
It's been a very emotional journey to get to where we are, where we have something of an idea of what this movie will be like. It's apparently based on Venom, Lethal Protector and Planet of the Symbiotes, which both are the most recognized Venom story arcs, spanning several comics. Lethal Protector tells the story of how Eddie Brock left New York for San Francisco, where he lives as a drifter without meaning in his life. But is tracked down and caught by the Life Foundation, a sinister organization planning for a nuclear holocaust in the wake of the Cold War, for a select rich elite to survive in a new Eden once all the rest of the world has been destroyed.
That doesn't sound very evil, if I'm honest. That just sounds like rich people wanting to survive the end of the world. Or is the evil that they're using their resources to prepare for the end instead of trying to prevent the end?
Either way, they want to use the powers of the symbiote as a form of enforcers in this new society, and thus they extract 5 seeds from the Venom symbiote and merges them with 5 security personnel, thus creating Riot, Scream, Phage, Lasher, and Agony. No, not that Agony. Venom quickly enough defeats them all together with Spider-Man, after which Venom and Spider-Man agrees on a frail peace for as long as Venom stays in San Francisco and only goes after bad guys. Planet of the Symbiotes sees symbiotes building a teleportation device to bring symbiotes from the planet they have invaded to Earth.
I should explain. Comics are consistently retconned in order for new authors to tell new stories without having to resort to massive tomes of old lore. They basically begin again over and over again. There's the New 52 reboot, there's the Flashpoint Paradox reboot, there is a lot of stuff. And basically what happens then is everything you previously knew, it gets redone. So we still have the same characters, but they might have different backstories or different personalities. They have stuff added or withdrawn. It's an evolutionary process for comics, basically.
In this iteration, the symbiotes are inherently bad guys who wants to dominate their hosts, except for the Venom symbiote who wants to bond with a willing host. Venom, Spider-Man and the Iron Spider puts a stop to the invasion, but not before many symbiotes have already come through the portal and become absorbed by Carnage, Venom's quote-unquote son, worn by the deranged serial killer Cletus Cassidy, and grown into a gigantic monster. It ends with the symbiotes and Brock bonding completely with one another on a cellular level, and unleashing a psychic scream.
A bullshit Deus Ex Machina. And it's a supersonic a supersonic sound so haunting and miserable, it forces the symbiotes to commit suicide. It annoys me that I have praised this character so much, and then I have to admit that's an actual thing.
Back to the movie. At this point, the trailers have only shown 2 symbiotes. One is Venom, and through the grapevine I've heard the other is Riot, who will be the main antagonist of the movie. However, we have also seen containers with more symbiotes, one of which is yellow, so there is every chance we'll either get to see Scream or Phage, and the others. And there is a giant thing with energy shooting off it, so maybe there is a teleporter. The Life Foundation is mentioned as well, and we get to see humans merged with symbiotes. So far so good, but it won't be a true to spirit adaptation of the comics, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing. For one thing, there is no connection with Spider-Man. It might seem like a death rattle for the movie right there, but looking at how Venom in comics has become its own entity separate from Spider-Man, I don't have a lot against that change. People will claim it doesn't make any sense for Venom to have spider powers, but considering people with different symbiotes have the same powers as Venom, and Venom being able to swing using goo tendrils and making people stronger and faster just by his presence, I don't really see what powers Spider-Man has that Venom doesn't have by himself. The only practical connection between Venom and Spider-Man is his design, and Sony has already done away with the giant spider on his chest and back, and it weirdly enough works. Still, they needed to change how Eddie Brock becomes Venom, and according to the trailer, the story seems to be as follows. Brock is a reporter investigating the Life Foundation because of accusations of them experimenting on human beings in some fashion.
We know, but the people in the movie don't know.
While breaking into one of their facilities, Brock becomes infected with the symbiote, which takes a toll on his mind and body. Agents from the Foundation seek him out to get the creature back, but it fights them off, with Brock being unable to control it.
Why would we do that?
At this point, I'd like to believe the movie will follow Brock trying to rein the symbiote in while both of their characters bounces off one another, while at the same time being pursued by the Life Foundation, but I don't know. The goal of the Life Foundation seems to have changed as well. They seem to either want to clean the world off of humans or elevate them into something greater using the symbiotes. I assume it will all lead to some epic climax where the symbiotes are trying to open a portal or otherwise to infect the human race. And Brock and the symbiote, having now reached an understanding and similar goals, thus fully becoming Venom, has to stop them.
It's all just speculation, but that's pretty much how I'd like it to go down. That said, I don't actually think that's how it will go down, because of a couple of things that I see in the trailer.
For one thing, when Brock tries to reason with the symbiote to not harm people, it says,
The way I see it, we can do whatever we want. Do we have a deal?
That, to me, sounded like it was using a royal we. It was using a royal we, referring to itself, not the both of them. And at that point, I have to ask, the people who made this movie, did they think it was just the symbiote that is Venom? And if so, how well do they know the characters then?
It's just a brief thing, of course, and I haven't actually seen the movie yet, and it all does suggest the symbiote is trying to dominate Brock, which does correlate with the comics. It may just be a clever rewrite, compressing a lot of character development to make it fit into the movie, but I remain suspicious. Then we have the scene in the grocery shop, with the monologue that was so weird you could not help but laugh.
We will eat both your arms and then both of your legs, and then we will eat your face right off your head. You will be this armless, legless, faceless thing, won't you? Rolling down the street like a turd in the wind.
I guess I don't have anything against it as such. And in fact, it pleases me to know that the makers of this movie, they didn't turn Venom into a mindless beast. They actually gave him a dialogue. That makes me happy. But what can we expect from a movie with that level of dialogue?
And why the hell did they reveal his face like that? I assume to symbolically display he and the symbiote are now as one and at peace with one another, but it's so blunt, looks ridiculous, and it doesn't make any sense in the movie. And also, look at Brock's smile. He is clearly looking forward to eating that man. The whole appeal of Venom's relationship to Brock is that Brock has to control his bestial nature of the symbiote while at the same time being on the same wavelength as the symbiote. And also, what is with all the war stuff in the first place? Venom doesn't eat people, and then he fucks off like he just farted, not devoured a man. And then there are small stuff like this.
We all have our own problems, our own issues, our own demons.
This I actually dare put a definitive on. At no point in the comics does Brock refer to the symbiote as a demon. He calls it a symbiote when referring to people, when talking to people who knows the details about what's going on, or he calls it his other half or his shadow.
Little things like that makes me suspect this movie has no understanding of the comics or the characters. So where does that leave us? What do I expect of this movie? Well, that I expected to not understand the source material. I expect it to look good, not realistic, no part of this at all looks real, but I think it looks fantastic full stop. It's colorful, energetic and organic, and I expect it to be fun, just to see Venom rampage his way through San Francisco. I don't expect there to be any blood or gore, but it's possible they've simply hidden that stuff away for the trailer. It is R-rated after all. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if the action is pretty dull. Remember the first trailer, how unappealing and tedious it looked. The later trailers looked exciting, but that may just be clever editing using 90% of the exciting stuff in the movie, and the rest of the movie actually looks like the first trailer. There's every chance of that happening. Also, according to rumor, Woody Harrelson has been cast as Cletus Cassidy, but only in a minor scene. I expect his presence to be a setup for a potential sequel if the movie isn't bad.
I got more, but it's time for me to leave. And see you all tomorrow, and let's hope it's a good movie. I'm gonna need you all to forget everything I just said, all of it. I need you to just forget it. God, how do I sum up this movie in a single sentence? Venom is a bad movie done fantastically well. Sony, in association with Marvel, was granted access to the Marvel formula for how to make a movie entertaining, but they didn't manage to figure out how to make it good. And I'll explain about that, but first I'll go over what all of the stuff that makes this movie bad. First of all, the plan to go into space and bring back symbiotes and then put them into humans so humans can live in space, that's very convoluted and specific. I mean, first of all, did they know they were up there? And did they know what they were capable? Or did they just bring them back and put them into glass cages with humans and see what happened? Okay, I know that's not what happened. They used experimental animals, but still, that seems very, very odd. I mean, and at no point the plot, I mean the entire plot, not just that plot, all of the plot, none of it made any sense. And it's so full of holes that it honestly feels like a calendar. There's no blood. In a movie with one of the most violent anti-heroes in modern comics, there is no blood! None! And then there's the characters. God, the characters. None of them feel like their comic counterparts. None of them are the same characters we see in the comics. And with that said, they don't act like any of their comic counterparts, but with that said, they don't act like human beings either!
When Anne Weying breaks up with Brock for snooping in her law papers and getting her fired, he just looks like a lost puppy and takes it, instead of pointing out how she was effectively handling evidence the Life Foundation was killing people. He should have been furious at her. And in another scene, Venom is busy not slaughtering policemen, and Anne sees him about to not kill someone, and freaks out when he becomes Brock again, and all of a sudden, she is yelling at him to get into a car so she can take him to hospital. Bitch! You just saw your monster boyfriend not murder a dozen people! You should be running for your life!
And then we have things that were stupid from beginning to end, but they were in the comics, so of course they have to be in the movie.
Like the symbiote emerging like one of the heads of the darkness from Eddie's body to converse with him. If they felt the need to show Eddie conversing with Venom face to face, why not do a nightmare sequence like they did in the comics or the animated show? Anything that does not look this ridiculous. Something even dumber, Venom is no longer the identity of Brock and the symbiote together, it's the symbiote's actual name! Even if you look past how suddenly
We are Venom.
no longer makes any sense, and if you excuse it by saying it's a translation of a Clintar name, why would it translate it into English? Even dumber than that, Riot being better armed than Venom. And that is actually how Venom puts it to Eddie, that Riot is better equipped than he is.
Let me just put a pin in... I'll put the pin right there. Right there. There's the pin. Right there. I'll put the pin in how stupid that is. Amorphous creatures from another world who can change their body at will and add or withdraw muscle mass as they see fit are armed with blades and fists. They are armed with those things. They don't just form them, no. They are armed with them. Now, to be fair, it is entirely possible that he is referring to how symbiote biology is apparently compatible with technology, as we have seen in symbiotes like Agent Venom or Scorn, and it is possible that actually their weapons, they are real metal weapons that they have broken down and storing within their bodies. That is entirely possible. It's entirely possible. It does not change how stupid, how ridiculous that concept is from beginning to end. It was dumb in the comics and it's dumber in the movie.
And then we have the Vor thing. I read more lore than actual comics, so maybe I'm uninformed, but as far as I know, Venom does not eat people. I don't think even Carnage eats people. The closest would be Carnage absorbing other symbiotes in the Planet of the Symbiotes storyline. It makes sense, of course, it's basic biology for powerful creatures to need lots of food, but in a movie where goop can just pop in and out of bodies, presumably break down metal blades in their mass, and violate the laws of mass and density, I don't think basic biology actually matters.
And despite all of that shit, I still enjoyed it. Why?
I believe there's no such thing as a good story, only good storytelling. When Marvel found out Sony was making a Venom movie, they got their lawyers involved, because they have so much invested in the MCU, and Venom is a huge part of Marvel. There's rumblings going around Marvel is planning to somehow involve Venom in the MCU, once all the legalities have been worked out, and therefore they needed the movie done in a certain way. No matter how much truth there is in that, this movie has a very powerful scent of MCU. It's paced and built like a Marvel movie. It's colorful and light-hearted, with a focus on action and comedy, and both of those are done very well.
Oh,
What are you doing?
I'm putting my hands up.
Take him down.
Marvel formula helped, but I actually think there's more to it than just the Marvel formula. I actually think that everything that makes this movie bad also makes it good, and I'll explain why, don't you worry. Most people who watch superhero movies aren't aware that most superhero movies are actually very little like the comics they are based on. And I just assumed that Sony, they were going to misinterpret, misrepresent, and otherwise misunderstand the source material. I just assumed that's what was going to happen.
Sony were very clearly aware they could not do what Marvel does and take elements from comics and rewrite them in such a way that both the fans and broader audiences would enjoy it. So instead, they took a gamble and did something I was not prepared for them doing, something much more interesting, I think. They stuck to the style of writing that we've seen in the original comics. The writing, plot and characters of the original comics, they were all very hokey, but it was done in such a way that we could enjoy it while knowing just how stupid it was. It was written like a parody of itself, and the movie, I think, reflects that. Contrasted against modern comics, contrasted against the MCU, this movie is a fantastic action-packed comedy from beginning to end. In comics, the symbiote is consistently intimidating and vindictive, but in this movie it comes off as a high school bully. Brock, who's an arrogant street-smart survivor under the influence of a hostile will, goes between ragdoll pulled along with whatever the symbiote wants to do, and timid older sibling trying to straighten out his tweeny younger brother. There is something so wholesome about that, I can't help but love it. And to contrast that with Venom's trademark violence and appearance is hilarious from beginning to end. And if you don't believe me when I say this was done intentionally, I'd like to point to the moments after Brock gets the symbiote back, after having lost it for a bit. They jump off like a Black Hulk, and then Venom tells Brock it has decided to save the Earth, because it likes it here and doesn't want to see the world end. And its exact words are, "Brock, I'll level with you. On my world, I'm a bit of a loser as well." Now, you're not aware of this if you don't read comics, but Venom is actually the weakest of all the symbiotes. And that's because, through some bullshit science, every new generation of symbiotes are automatically more powerful than the predecessor. And Venom is the progenitor of most symbiotes in the Marvel Universe. At least all the ones that we've seen. He has a direct familial tie to in one shape or another. Alright, so just by his existing, he is the weakest of all the symbiotes. And he has explained this to Brock. It is well established in the comics that this is the way it is. However, at no point would the symbiote refer to itself as weak. So hearing Venom describes itself as a bit of a loser, that's like the epitome. That's the highest pedestal of self-awareness. As the monstrous creature from outer space who can crumble brick buildings by looking at them, and responsible for so much pain and misery, has become Malcolm in the Middle. How is that not a parody? How can that not be deliberate? As for the other characters, Drake, well, he's just a bad guy. That's his entire character. Bad guy. He's there just because the movie needed one. Bad guy. Anne Weying, the bride of Venom, feels a little bit like a Pepper Potts that has given up on Tony Stark and moved on, until the script forces her to have not moved on. Not very interesting, but she works well enough as a love interest. Beyond characters, this movie is pretty. Not heart-achingly beautiful, and the CGI is embarrassingly evident, but the design of the symbiotes is striking. Venom, for starters, looks just as ridiculously exaggerated as the comics. Riot looks like he's covered in amorphous metal, and even without a host, the symbiotes look amazingly creepy and disgusting. Every shot in the movie is color corrected and saturated to the point of almost feeling like a palette of primary colors. It feels like a comic book, the way Marvel movies feel like a comic book, in the best possible sense. Also, there is a specific scene I want to bring some extra attention to, because I suspect a full half of all the effort the CGI team put into this movie went into this one specific 30-second scene, with a very noteworthy circumstance, with the appearance of a character no one was expecting, and a certain action taking place between two people and one alien. Because it's the only special effects in the entire film that looked real. frighteningly real. Arousingly real.
On the one hand, there is no obvious reason for why this scene was rendered so much more than the rest of the movie. However, a movie is a story being told through a complex set of visual means, and part of that is to build a scene in such a way that it contrasts from the other scenes for dramatic effect. I think this scene was so much more rendered than the rest of the film to give it more impact, which I think only served it.
While many of the other scenes looked cool, nothing all that memorable was going on in them. This scene needed to look as real as humanly possible. Also, it made sense from an editing perspective to render this specific scene. If one of the human experiment scenes was realistically done, it would have clashed with the lighthearted nature of the film. If it was one of the action scenes, all the rest of the action would have just looked awful in comparison. Since they evidently had the time and resources to render some but not all of the CGI to the point of realism, I think this was a very good choice. Because if they hadn't done it, it would have looked like one of the scenes from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But they went the extra mile, and the result was gorgeous. Finally, the action scenes were all pretty cool, but whenever Venom fought, I was nailed to the seat. It's a fascinating thing to see that gigantic black mass of goo, muscles and teeth pummel through and eat the heads of whatever gets in his way. It was a bit odd to see him jump into the bay and swim away like a huge fish, but aside from that, every bit of fighting was a joy to behold. I promise, every fight scene looks just as good as in the movie as it does in the trailer. And the trailer didn't even reveal half of them.
And there really isn't much more to it. Venom is not a clever movie, but it's fun from beginning to end, and so much of it doesn't make any sense. But if you can forgive that, and you can forgive that it doesn't complement the comics in any way, shape or form, then I think you'll truly enjoy this film. So, where does that leave us now? With the future, presumably, with the horizon over there, with my screen I am reading off of. That's where it leaves us. And Sony has gone on record saying Venom is the first movie in a new franchise that they're developing, and I am nervously looking forward to it. And you see, the Tobey Maguire movies, they all had a strange sort of consistency about them, where they were all bad, but they were all bad in the same way, and none of them were really worse than the other. They had a strange sort of consistent badness where they were all bad in the same way. A spirit, if you will. They all had the same spirit. If the next movie can achieve that, if it can achieve the same spirit as this movie, where everything that was bad about it made it better, then I think we're safe. However, annoyingly, I don't think that's the direction it should go.
Venom ends with a hidden scene meant to tease a sequel, just like the MCU movies, but the nature of the tease makes it difficult to make a sequel in the same spirit as this film. You see, it ends with Eddie Brock about to interview infamous serial killer Cletus Cassidy, played in a clown wig by Woody Harrelson, and it cuts off with Harrelson smiling into the camera, promising, "When I get out of here, and I will get out of here, there will be carnage." Now, think back to the Spider-Man animated series, when Carnage was first introduced. Cassidy is a sadistic, nihilistic serial killer, imbued with superpowers that turned him into an inhuman monster.
Cassidy is gone. There is only carnage.
There was a big problem. It was a kids' show, and he wasn't allowed to kill anyone. In the comics, upon receiving the symbiote, he breaks out of jail by turning his limbs into axes and cutting the police up, after which he went on a senseless murder spree. In the TV show, he knocked some police unconscious and used the vase to steal people's souls.
You see the problem?
Venom kills people left and right in this movie. He eats the heads off of a few people, but we never get to see anything visceral. The camera cuts away instead of showing it, all to keep it R-rated. But really, the only way to do carnage in a way that's worthwhile is to actually show some carnage. He needs to be allowed to gut, dismember and drown people in his symbiote as he sees fit. But if he does, I don't see how this sequel can have anything like the same spirit as this movie. I mostly know Woody Harrelson as playing lovable rednecks, full of charm and a great big smile, but he did also play Mickey Knox in Natural Born Killers, which as a character is very similar to Cletus Cassidy. Thing about it is, Cassidy is an inherently repulsive individual. There's no charm about him, you just want him as far away from you as possible. Even as Mickey Knox, Harrelson had a certain charm about him, despite being completely deranged. He had a history of childhood abuse and a twisted sense of morality that turned him into a perfect anti-hero for the story he was in. Cassidy murdered his dog and grandmother when he was a kid, because he thought it was funny, and burned down the orphanage he was sent to. And I just can't see Harrelson doing that sort of insanity justice. With him cast as Cassidy, I expect to find Cassidy charming and completely impossible to take seriously.
But that's all for the future. I did not see how this movie was going to turn out, and I have a feeling I'm not going to see how the sequel turns out either. So... yeah, a couple of things that I want to that I hope to see in a future sequel. First of all, I want to see a nightmare sequence, because that hasn't been done in any of the live action movies, and also it's only been done in the comics and in the first animated TV series. Yes, I don't think it's been done in any of the newer iterations of the animated Spider-Man TV show. So I would really like to see one of those. Second thing that I hope they don't turn Carnage building size in the sequel, because that was silly even in the comics. But then again, maybe that's exactly why they should do it, because it was silly in the comics, and if any movie could make it work, it would be this one. Last thing. In this movie, there is a scene where a yellow symbiote successfully bonds with a rabbit. I don't care that Drake said all the symbiotes except Riot and Venom died. I want to see a bunny symbiote. Time to wrap this movie up.
A lot of people hate this film, and I really understand why. But I needed to throw my 10 cents into the discussion. As a movie, I think it's fun, and you don't need to be a nerd scholar or lore hunter to appreciate it, as evidenced by the peals of laughter all around me in the cinema. I don't see a failed attempt at making an accurate superhero story, and I don't see a pathological disregard towards fans by the directors. I see a different take on a very cool character, and I don't think his reputation is going to be ruined because of it. It's just another of the many incarnations of Venom. When the film was over, everyone clapped. Seeing Woody Harrelson as Cletus Cassidy and promising there would be carnage, people cheered. So I feel confident when I give you these closing words. Venom is a bad movie, and I loved every second of it.
Let us take you, expand your mind. We are Venom, together now, paths align. The world is mine, and it can be yours in time. And we're climbing to the top when our worlds combine. We are Venom, here to expand your mind. We are Venom, together now, paths align. We are Venom, I'm telling you the world is mine. And we're climbing to the top when our worlds combine. Let us take you, expand your mind. We are Venom, together now, paths align. The world is mine, and it can be yours in time. And we're climbing to the top when our worlds combine. We are Venom, here to expand your mind. We are Venom, together now, paths align. We are Venom, I'm telling you the world is mine. And we're climbing to the top when our worlds combine.